With me today, Mr. President, is Mr. Matt Turner, one of my colleagues in my Senate office. Mr. President, I want to talk about one of President Biden's nominees to be on the federal bench. But first, I want to digress for a moment.
A federal bench nominee tied to groups that glorify cop killers and blame America for 9/11? Senator John Kennedy isn't having it. What he said on the Senate floor will leave you stunned and questioning everything about Biden's judicial picks. Let's dive in.
I love animals, and I especially love dogs. If only people had the hearts of dogs, the world would be better off. And Mr. President, you and I, of course, are in the same profession, politics. Politics takes a big heart and a lot of wind and a thick skin. And I try not to worry too much about what anybody thinks of me, except dogs. I really like dogs. I used to have a beagle, Mr. President. His name was Roger. I loved Roger to death. We lost him a few years ago to cancer. Roger was a stray. Actually, Roger was raised to hunt rabbits. And if you know anything about beagles, when a beagle gets on a scent, the beagle is oblivious to everything else. They just follow that scent. And Roger got on a scent and got lost and showed up at my house. So Becky and I took Roger in. Roger was a rascal. He was a rascal. He loved us, but he couldn't help himself. Whenever there was a small crack in the door, Roger was gone. He was out and gone. And he'd stay gone 2 or 3 days. And I would worry incessantly. Oh, is he hurt? Will he come back? I love Roger. He'd always come back. But about half of the time, when Roger would come back, he'd come back dragging roadkill. And Roger, before he came, I wouldn't let him inside with his roadkill, so he'd go in the backyard and he would hide his roadkill. He didn't think I was watching him. Roger would hide his roadkill under my back porch. I miss Roger. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the nomination process that the White House uses to select federal judges, the nomination process is what I'm talking about, looks to me like something Roger was hiding under my back porch. I just don't understand it. I don't understand the criteria or the process of the Biden White House uses to put people on our federal bench. Now, I'm not suggesting that President Biden hasn't made some good nominations, because he has. And I voted for his nominations, who I thought were qualified. But I think it's also, any fair-minded person would have to conclude that over the past several years, President Biden has nominated some people to the federal bench who, quite frankly, are not qualified to judge a pie contest. And that's just a fact. It's my opinion, but if you go look at the testimony of all of his nominees, I think you see I'm right. With respect, the president's pick of Mr. Adeel Mangi is frankly one of his worst. Mr. Mangi is affiliated with an organization that calls itself the, quote, Alliance Families for Justice. The Alliance of Families for Justice. In fact, Mr. Mangi is not just affiliated with this group, he's on their advisory board. One of the Alliance's founders was a member of a domestic terrorist organization. What does that mean? One of the Alliance's founders was convicted of murdering police officers in cold blood. He killed cops. Now, the Alliance for Families for Justice, on whose board Mr. Mangi sits, or at least sat, advocates for the release of people who kill cops. Let me say that again. I didn't know such organizations existed. The organization whose board, advisory board, Mangi sits or sat, advocates for the release of people who kill cops. This organization has even called people who kill police officers, quote, freedom fighters. Freedom fighters. Wow. I know that sounds crazy. That's because it is. Why So many law enforcement organizations have sent all of us on the Judiciary Committee letters opposing Mr. Mangi's nomination. I've never gotten so many letters or phone calls from law enforcement supporting or opposing, in this case, opposing a nomination. For example, I'm not going to read all of them. I would be here the rest of the evening. For example, take the National Sheriff's Association. I think most of us have heard of them. The National Sheriff's Association wrote all members of the Judiciary Committee, and here's what they said. They said, Mr. Mangi's association with, and I'm quoting now, not my words, the sheriff's words, Mr. Mangi's association with an organization advocating the release of convicted cop killers is seriously disturbing, end quote. That's coming from the sheriffs. According to the National Sheriff's Association, the alliance's position, on whose board, advisory board, Mangi sat or sit, according to the sheriffs, the alliance position is, quote, I quote again, not only tone deaf to the sacrifices made by law enforcement officials, but also disrespectful to the victims of heinous crimes, as well as the family and friends of officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice, end quote. We also heard from the National Association of Police Organizations. I think most people have heard of them. They said, quote, about Mr. Mangi's nomination, they said Mr. Mangi's, quote, conscious work with the alliance shows an anti-victim and anti-police bias that would certainly cloud his decision-making as a judge. That came from the police. Those aren't my words. Those are law enforcement words. Now, by itself, Mr. Mangi's work for and with this organization that I refer to as the Alliance should be disqualifying. But there is more. It's a lot more. From 2019 to 2023, 4 years, Mr. Mangi also served on the advisory board of another group. And this group calls itself, quote, the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. The Center for Security, Race, and Rights. This organization is steeped in hatred and anti-Semitism. I don't know any other way to put it. And I think any reasonable person who looked at the center's work would agree with me, at least as to my description. Every single American that I know, and I bet this is true for you too, Mr. President, every single American that I know remembers where they were on September 11, 2001. We call it 9/11. We don't even have to explain ourselves anymore. We just say 9/11. And every American knows what you're talking about. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11, Mr. President, Mr. Mangi's Center for Security, Race, and Rights, on whose advisory board Mr. Mangi either sits or sat, they sponsored an event entitled, here's the title of their event, quote, Whose Narrative? 20 years since 9/11, 2001. This event, the purpose of the event, was to blame America and blame Americans for 9/11. That's why they held the event. This event, speakers there blamed, quote, U.S. imperialism, not the terrorists, U.S. imperialism for the 9/11 attacks that killed thousands of innocent American citizens. And the event of the most despicable speakers that even the would be challenged to come up with. One of those speakers, Mr. Sami al-Arian. Mr. al-Arian was convicted of providing support to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Another speaker, Mr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi, let me try that again, Abdul-Hadi, has ties to terrorist hijackers. A third speaker, Mr. Hatim Bazian, publicly called for an intifada in the United States. Hard men. Rough words. American imperialism. Now, Mr. Mangi claims that he didn't know about this event. That's what he told us in committee. But his center has a long history of sponsoring hate-filled events, and that's just a fact. That's not rhetoric, that's just a fact. Are we really expected to believe that Mr. Mangi had no idea what the center was up to? He sat on this advisory board, for God's sakes. Now, let's talk about the director of this center on whose advisory board Mr. Mangi sat. The director also has a vile history of bad. In 2021, the director of this organization on whose set, he signed a letter. That letter's posted on the Alliance's website. So far as I know, you can go to it and read it right now. In the letter, the director says, I'm going to quote, that she is, quote, in awe of the Palestinian struggle to resist violent occupation, removal, erasure, and the expansion of Israeli settler colonialism. Israeli settler colonialism. Hamas murdered, raped, maimed Jewish men, Jewish women, little Jewish children, and according to Mr. Mangi's organization's director, it's Israel's fault. The center's director describes himself as being in respectful awe. I think the vast majority of Americans would describe themselves as being nauseated. The center's director, of whom I speak, also personally recruited Mr. Mangi to serve on the center's advisory board. Again, are we really expected to believe that Mr. Mangi didn't know about the director's vile behavior? Did Mr. Mangi not run a single Google search on this person? Now, on top of all that, I do not believe, this is one person's opinion, I do not believe that Mr. Mangi told me the truth in our judiciary here, Mr. President. When I asked him about his involvement with this radical organization, Mr. Mangi told me he only provided, quote, advice on academic areas of research. That's what he told me. He said, my only involvement is advice on academic areas of research. Those aren't my words, those are Mr. Mangi's words. But it turns out he was also funneling money to the organization. Tens of thousands of dollars from himself and from his law firm. I didn't know that at the time of the hearing. I wish that I had. Now, with these facts, and I've tried, Mr. President, just to stick to the facts, I find it very hard to believe that anyone can, in good faith, strike that, Mr. President. I find it hard to believe that a fair-minded, objective person who's not involved in this nomination can defend Mr. Mangi's nomination. Now, some of my Senate colleagues are doing that. That's okay. Sometimes people disagree, and that's a good thing. You know, I believe in having two sides, opposing sides, come together in a dialectic. Sometimes that's how you find the truth. But it's gotten kind of personal. I regret that. Some people, not all people, Mr. President, you don't do this, but some people, when they're losing an argument, they on epithets, you know. You're a racist, or you're a sexist, or you're a misogynist, or you're a Nazi, or you're a bigot, or in this case, you're Islamophobic. And some of this members of this body have made that suggestion. They've suggested that all the people who are opposing Mr. Mangi's nomination, based on the facts that I just tried to describe as fairly as I could, some senators have suggested that asking Mr. Mangi's questions about his involvement with these organizations is Islamophobic. One of my colleagues, which again is his right, came down to the Senate floor and he said that certain Republican members of the committee, quote, believed that he, referring to Mr. Mangi, must be a terrorist because he's a Muslim. Wow, that got my attention. That's not true. I believe that Mr. Mangi is not qualified to be a federal judge because he supports organizations that celebrate people who kill law enforcement officers. He supports organizations that hate Americans, and he supports organizations that hate Jews. When President Biden, as I said earlier, Mr. President, when President Biden has qualified people to the federal bench, I've supported them, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of their religion. I confess to asking tough questions in committee. That's my job. When you're put on the federal bench, you're there for life. For life. You're there for life. And you have the full power of the United States of America, the most powerful country in all of human history, behind you. So you better get it right. Just a few years ago, for example, I voted to confirm one of President Biden's nominees, Mr. now Judge, Mr. Zahid Qureshi. Mr. Qureshi happened to be at the time the first Muslim American federal judge. I voted for him, doing a great job. Unlike Mr. Mangi, Judge Qureshi was not on the board of an organization that celebrates and advocates for the release of cop killers. He was not on the board of an organization that sponsors anti-American events and blames 9/11 on American imperialism. Judge Qureshi was qualified and is qualified to serve on the federal bench. Mr. Mangi is not. He's just not. That's not Islamophobia, Mr. President. That's just a fact. And I think anyone who's being honest with themselves, particularly if you go look at the confirmation hearings and read the evidence, I think any person who's being honest with themselves will agree. So for these reasons, Mr. President, I ask my colleagues to oppose Mr. Mangi's nomination, and I urge President Biden to withdraw it. Thank you, Mr. President, for your time and attention. With that, I yield the floor.
What we just witnessed wasn't some routine political disagreement. This wasn't grandstanding. This was Senator John Kennedy laying out a clear, pointed, and deeply troubling case against a nominee who could soon wield enormous influence over the law in this country. This is a nominee for a lifetime seat on the federal appellate bench, just one step below the U.S. Supreme Court. And when Kennedy spoke, he didn't come with vague accusations or partisan talking points. He came with facts, affiliations, and direct quotes. This isn't about right versus left. It's not about Republican versus Democrat. It's about judgment, about who we elevate to positions of power in a system built on trust, impartiality, and the rule of law. The kind of person we trust to interpret the Constitution, rule on life-altering cases, and shape legal precedent for generations. Senator Kennedy reminded the country that Adeel Mangi didn't just passively attend a controversial event. He served on advisory boards of organizations that honored convicted murderers, including domestic terrorists who targeted and killed police officers. One of these groups even published material justifying the killing of cops, describing it as not a big deal. Another hosted speaker who has blamed America for the September 11 terrorist attacks. These aren't guilt by association concerns. These are documented affiliations with organizations that hold radical, even dangerous, views. And it's not just Senator Kennedy raising the alarm. Law enforcement organizations across the country, sheriff's departments, police unions, former prosecutors, have come forward to say this nominee's record is not one of neutrality or balance. It reflects a deep ideological leaning, and one that raises legitimate questions about whether justice can truly be blind in his courtroom. Let's ask the honest question. Should someone who lent his name and leadership to a group that praises convicted terrorists, who referred to cop killers as freedom fighters, now be given a seat where he'll decide matters of federal law and constitutional rights? This isn't political theater. It's a moment of reckoning. Because at the heart of this nomination fight is something much larger than one man. It's about the moral compass of our judiciary. It's about whether we still care about the standards we once held sacred. Are we so afraid of being accused of bias or insensitivity that we're willing to overlook real dangerous ideologies just to check a political box? Senator Kennedy's words were sharp, but they were grounded in concern for the justice system, for law enforcement, and for ordinary Americans who want fair, impartial judges, not activists in robes. So now we turn to you. Do Kennedy's warnings deserve deeper consideration? Are these concerns being brushed aside in the name of diversity optics, or political expediency? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters because these decisions ripple far beyond Washington. They reach your communities, your rights, and your safety. And if you believe, like we do, that transparency and accountability should be the bare minimum in our judicial system, then support this platform. Like this video, subscribe for more hard-hitting, fact-based political commentary, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Because at the end of the day, facts matter, truth matters, and the future of our courts matters more than ever.